we finally teed it up. We wanted to get you, Pip, on, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Because you've been involved with Yoga for Resilience, which is a big hit with our community. But there's a lot of other stuff you do, the Healthy Tradie Project. And I wanted to, as I now often do in these episodes, is take you back to a moment in time. And I want to take some words from your TED Talk that you did. The 5th of September, it's 1 a.m. In the darkness of my bedroom, I'm on the floor, my head buried on my knees. I'm stunned. I'm in shock. It was just after midnight that my phone rang. Private number. I didn't answer. Not a minute later, it rang again, and this time it was my brother, Owen. My brother never calls me in the middle of the night, and the moment that he spoke, I knew something was terribly wrong. Bravely, but in a broken voice, he said, "It's Dale. Dale has died by suicide."
I don't think it matters how much time passes. I still remember the events of that day and that night like it was yesterday. I think for me it was complete shock and disbelief to even hear those words coming out of Owen's mouth. Dale was our eldest brother and he was 35 at the time. Dale was a carpenter. He'd worked in the building industry since he was 15, left school at year 10 and went on to be do an apprenticeship and be a chippy, and he was larger than life. He had this enormous group of friends. He was this really casual tradie, and from the outset and what we all saw, he was really always enjoying life. And that moment just completely, I think, shattered my world and I think that of our family. It was nothing that we ever expected we would ever face.
I remember when I first heard about my dad, I was sitting at the top of the stairway and similar. Tragedy just comes out of nowhere and it hits you in the face like nothing that you can imagine. Just pulls the rug out from under your feet. What happened in the moments after you received that phone call?
I think I sat literally just on the floor in the bedroom, head in my hands, just in this complete shock. And then I feel like this autopilot kicked in. I was in Canberra at the time, so I was living in Canberra. My family's all in Queensland. And immediately this autopilot kicked in is I need to get back to Queensland. At the time, our parents had only a couple of weeks before left on their first grey nomad trip. They were travelling around Australia with some friends, and for me it was I need to be in Queensland. I need to be back in Brisbane. I need to be there with Owen. And it was about, booking flights, getting on that first flight out of Canberra to get back home. And I think it was it wasn't until I probably actually got up in the air on that plane that I actually started to cry. And I think that's when it really hit me and I felt that sense of loss. But I think up until that point, I was just moving on autopilot, thinking about getting home, getting in touch with mum and dad. How do we find them and where they are in their travels? And it was, landing in Brisbane, seeing Owen, my sister-in-law, my nephews, and it it was very much just this mode of what needs to be done right now, and talking to those who were either with him that day or those of his mates who were around him at that time.
Yeah, I remember the first time my tears came was when I had to speak it into existence. So I heard my mum told me that my dad had passed, and I was, like shattered, but it really came through when I had to tell my mates that I had to go back home, when they asked why, and I had to tell them. And I just couldn't do it without breaking into tears. You made your TED Talk, I think it was 10 years ago or thereabouts, and I can still see almost the tears coming up in your eyes now. Dale still lives with you today.
He does, and I think it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters how long passes. I think we begin to learn how to live with a new normal. I think that's the best way I can describe it. There's still songs that come on the radio. There's still days during the year that just, bring up all these emotions. And there's moments that, I just have, and I remember him and I remember those moments. But there's always a void. And I think that's something that I've really noticed, is that as a family, we were very, very big on, coming together for birthdays and obviously Christmas. And certainly early on, there was this void there in our family, and it was noticeable. It was obvious, and you could never fill it. But for me, it was important to celebrate him. It was important to acknowledge his birthday and talk about him. We had, I've got two nephews from on Owen's children, and they were 6 months and 2 years old at the time that Dale died. And for them, I wanted to keep that memory alive and continue those conversations. But I think that's been my biggest thing throughout all of this, is continuing to talk and continuing to have the conversation and honour him.
Yeah. I do want to talk about, later on, Dale specifically, but also, how you remember him and how you honour him as well. But I do want to linger on that immediate aftermath. You said you went on autopilot, but at the same time, there's almost no script that you can follow. When you look back on how you and how your family either came together or ventured off in your own directions, how do you reflect on how you struggled with Dale's loss?
I think we all dealt with it in our own individual way. I think for my parents, for mum and dad, a part of them died that day. And, I remember my dad saying that, no parent should ever have to say goodbye to their child. I don't think mum ever really could understand and ever really, came to terms with the fact that she lost her son. Dad, I think, didn't want to talk about it. That was his way of coping. Mum did. And a bit like me, I guess, is for me, my biggest struggle was not having answers. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about it. And I would talk to his mates. And the overwhelming response I got was no one saw this coming. No one had any idea that he was struggling to that point. And that for me, I don't know, it was a bit of a kick in the guts, I think, at times, because I started to see that, gosh, there is so much that anyone could have done had we actually known or had we been aware that he was having those thoughts. And talking about it for me was a way, I think, of healing. I went on to do the applied suicide intervention skills training, and again, that was another reminder of, gosh, these are all the things that I guess we thought were probably just part of life. They were things that we all go through and challenges that we all face. But for him, that compound of all those challenges was obviously putting him in a place where he felt that that was the only option. So I think while we all had our own individual way of dealing with it, I feel like it certainly brought us closer together, even though, Dad didn't necessarily talk about it. Mum and I did. Owen, I think it's brought Owen and I closer together over the years as well. But I feel like there was initially probably a lot of guilt that all of us carried because we didn't know and we didn't see it coming, yet we would have done anything had we had the opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, I think about it all the time. And the layer of tragedy with suicide is, I mean, you can see with your work and how you speak about Dale, is that there was definitely reason for him to still be here. He was loved. And I don't know the word for it, but the amount of pain that's left behind and the amount of pain that caused, it's a shame that there couldn't have been that meeting point that stopped pain on both sides of that coin. I want to talk quickly about Dale. Because in my own journey, similar to you, like I comprehended my struggle with my dad's passing kind of out loud and, trying to figure it out, trying to ask questions. But I didn't do it for 9-10 years till after the fact. I kind of had both. I kept it all inside, and to some ways it worked, but to other ways it didn't. And then tried to figure it out. But over it's now 16 years since he passed, I kind of forgot who he was because I didn't address it. I didn't square it away. So I want to ask you, you mentioned it briefly, but who was Dale?
Dale was the eldest and I'm the youngest. And he was my protector growing up. He had, he was protective of his little sister. And I think we had this, we just had this really beautiful relationship that was, different to my relationship with Owen. But he was this really casual guy. And, if you talk about being authentic, it was him. He had a saying that he just used to say, I'm not out to impress. If he wants to rock up in his footy shorts and a pair of thongs, then that's what he'll do because that's what he was comfortable in. And, I lived with him for a little while at a point in time in my life. And, I always remember every afternoon there would be people at his place. And he was that, he would do anything for anyone. If someone needed something built, he'd be there. It was always this, as tradies do, there's always this, kind of no money changes hands, but there's always this labour of giving and receiving between them. But, he was just, he was such a real, I don't know, I kind of see him as a real true blue Aussie. rough on the exterior, but with an absolute heart of gold. Absolute heart of gold.
Is there a moment where that heart of gold came through that's come into your head?
I think when he didn't hesitate in taking me in when I needed that in my life. I'd gone through a relationship breakup and he didn't hesitate in saying, come and live with me.
Big brother.
Big brother. Yeah. Yeah.
It's nice to see that he still brings like joy to your eyes and makes you smile. One of the things you did that you've already said after he passed is you did the intervention training. And you mentioned in your TED talk that you were made aware of all the things that you could have noticed if you had known. We just heard obviously what Dale was like, I guess, in the eyes of everyone at the time. But what did the people around him miss?
I think the things that we probably thought were just normal, everyday challenges that we face in life, certainly relationship and on again, off again, ups and downs. I think that had a big part to play. Career and work, the construction industry particularly goes through these cycles of, lots of work, not enough work, which has a huge flow-on effect to, financial pressures. Often, particularly then, you start and see the alcohol coming into play, gambling, all of those sorts of behaviours. So I think there was a lot of that in the mix that was impacting him at that time. And I think it's when, I guess, and this is me piecing together my view based on the conversations and what I went through and sort of, I guess, tried to come up with an answer for myself, I guess, to find peace in that.
Benefit of hindsight.
Yeah, and I think it's all of those things combined then that I feel had a big impact and a big part to play in how he was feeling it at that point in time, and perhaps seeing no way out of that, seeing, no hope.
I remember thinking about this a while back. It's kind of like Indiana Jones. If you go, everything's got to kind of line up for the tomb to be unlocked. So it's, you're talking about all the different things, relationship, diet, work, all of those things. And if they all line up at one point in time in a bad way, it can put you in a really vulnerable state. And it's hard to imagine someone in that state that you love, because you just don't want them to be in pain. And at the same time, you got to be kind to yourself, because you don't know what you don't know. And the narrative is clear now, but certainly not clear at the time. I mean, my experience, looking back, I can weave a narrative together that I should have seen it coming. But me sitting at the top of the stairs in that hostel, I definitely did not see it coming one bit. And I think that's one of the things that I admire about you, is you're trying to turn your family's tragedy and pain into prevention for others, but also in a way that honours Dale.
Yeah, I think for me it was in those couple of years after Dale died and, the conversations that I was having, I think what became really clear to me is that, gosh, there is so much that the everyday person can be doing to support the people around them. We don't have to have all the training. We don't need to be a professional, but we can simply have a greater awareness first and foremost, and then connecting with people and having those conversations and normalising this topic. I feel like back then in 2009, there was a lot less conversation around mental health, around suicide prevention. It was there, but it was still that bit of a taboo topic.
Definitely.
So for me, it was just like, gosh, we've got to start talking about this because we can all have an impact on someone else's life in a positive way if we simply just take the time. And, you know, we, particularly in this day and age, I think we glorify busy and, you know, we're all proud to be busy. But if we actually stop and take the time to really listen and actually when we check in with someone, listen for the answer, notice what might be going on for them at that time and be there for people, I think that can have a huge impact.
Yeah. This is going to lead nicely into the work that you do with the Healthy Tradie Project, but you talk about 2009, I guess the culture or the way people spoke about mental health. I remember, and speaking about like narratives that we can latch onto, I remember my dad telling me one day that he thought he was depressed and I would have been 17, 16 at the time. And I remember saying to him, well, do you really think you should go get some help? And he said, no, I can't do that. It would be the end of my career. And there's still flavours of that today, but it is way better than what it was. And you spoke about Dale having that rugged exterior, but that contrast of the emotion that he would have been feeling would have almost acted like a barrier that he didn't feel like he could have exposed his pain.
The mask that he wore, it fooled every one of us. And I think that's the thing, you know, this facade never really let any of us see what was actually really going on for him. And, you know, I think back to that period of time, working in construction, residential construction, like there would never have been any conversation around mental health, emotional health, you know, how you actually feeling. It just wouldn't have happened at all. And he just put on this facade and he wore this mask that really didn't let any of us see what was actually going on.
There's something that's coming to me as well. You spoke about him being your big brother.
Yep.
And maybe it's just a male thing, but I certainly sometimes buy into it a little bit where, and I mean this with a grain of salt, there's no time for you to struggle because you want to look after others. Do you think that was at play or is it play at all? Like where, no, don't worry about me. I need to look after others.
Yeah, I think so. I think he was, I think always focused on everyone else, very much so. And this is what I think is so tragic about it is that he would be there for any one of his mates and you talk to any one of his mates at any given time and they would tell you a story about the time when he supported them when they were going through a rough patch and he was the one who was always there. And the sad thing is that any one of those people would have been there for him had they been able to see what he was going through. And they would have done exactly for him what he did for them.
And so a lot of what you're doing now is creating an environment where people like Dale feel like they can reach for help.
Yeah, I think what I started to see, and it took me probably I started in construction in 2009. It was actually 2 weeks before Dale took his own life. And it was about 7 years later that I'd been in the industry. I was actually in New Zealand at the time doing a project over there that was the Australian Memorial, and it was in Wellington, and it was for the Anzac Centenary. And I think being a part of that project the meaning behind that project and the collaboration that we had between Australia, the Australian sort of team and the New Zealand team over there, and this act of service really lit, I think, a fire in me to come back to Australia knowing my story, knowing what I'd experienced, and go, how can I be of service to the community who I stand beside every day? And for me, it was about, Dale is a blue-collar worker. I work with these people every day. How can I support them? And I knew that there was lots of support when it came to crisis time. There was the phone and the text counselling services. But for me, I came back and said, well, but there's got to be so much more that we can be doing a long way before that to make sure that we don't get to crisis point. And that's when I started looking at, well, how do we create and build, really healthy and well individuals so that they're able to recognise when things are going off track and they've got some tools. And, tradies and blue-collar workers are very practical people. So, what are the tools that we can give them that are really easy and free but will have a massive impact on their life? And for me, it all came back down to this really just holistic view of well-being. It's the movement and exercise, it's nutrition and what we're eating, it's our recovery, our sleep, it's our time with, play. It's something that we do great as kids and we forget about as we get older, but, it's the antidote to stress. It's time in the sun. It's all of those things and that connection and that social interaction that are going to have a huge impact on how we show up as individuals and help keep us in a more healthy, I guess, mindset, but also physically as well.
Yes, you're certainly speaking to someone who agrees with you. It's funny you mentioned, you were working on some meaningful project in New Zealand and you wanted to find that within yourself. And there was a quote that almost pushed me into R4R. It was, when you find your weakness, you find your purpose. And it's like when something leaves a mark on you, it's almost, you can't help but find your way to it eventually. And it's just something that, like you said, lights a fire and you want to do something. With the Healthy Tradie Project, I can't help, it's something I see in similar circles, like say the rugby league community, just because it's like this hard exterior of people. And we're talking about the pain that's on the soft interior, and there's a gap there. I believe in the importance of like managing the stuff that people can't see, but how do you bridge that gap with, really practical minded people that go, I just got to get on with it?
We've used two key things, and I guess in the tools that we give, and one of those is yoga. Not that we tell them that we're doing yoga until about halfway through. And the other one is breathwork and mindfulness. And what I found is that when we actually, aside from talking and giving them information, to sit down and actually do, or to stand and do those exercises, they come away having felt the change immediately. Often we do, 3 minutes of a body scan meditation, and the change in people just, the shoulders relax. Most of them turn around and go, gosh, I feel so much more relaxed. I'm actually really tired. I'm like, well, it's probably because you need more sleep. But they get that change in their nervous system immediately. When we do yoga, it's an opportunity for them to drop into their body, come out of their head. They're not thinking about work for that 10 or 15 minutes if we do a pre-start session. They are connecting with those around them. It's light, it's fun. We have a laugh, and it's not only are they getting the physical benefits of actually stretching and starting their day in a different way, but I know that the golden nugget there is the mental health benefits, because they're not thinking about anything else other than having awareness of their body and where they're at today.
And how do you see it ripple? Because I maybe I've seen too many sitcoms or like videos, but I can't help but imagine the blokes that would see, I don't know, you're not doing that yoga shit, are you? And then it requires the person who did it to go, yeah, bloody oath I am. How do you see that? It's almost like schoolyard, like hierarchy. It's like you need strong characters to kind of bring in those new tools and show them, hey, no, this works. Yeah. And then they go, okay, maybe I'll give it a go. Yeah.
It's that positive peer group pressure.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's, we often start on site and you get, maybe 90%, 80-90% in there who are going, okay. And, there's a few that are standing back going, I'm not having a bar of any of that.
Yeah. Yoga, a bit of a stretch. Yeah.
But what we find is that that 10% look like the odd ones out.
Yeah.
So it becomes this positive peer group pressure, and then they might get in there and they'll do one move and then they'll come and do another. And when we're going back to sites on a regular basis, it's the constant conversation that's happening on site. We might be going fortnightly and the constant conversation is, is it yoga this week? Because they feel those benefits. And more often than not, there is more people who are actually taking part than those who just can't. And to be honest, I feel like it's probably ego, and particularly in that environment, they just can't let themselves, in case, and I think it probably comes down to in case they find that they can't do a particular pose. But for us and for me, it's always been about, I know the benefits of yoga. I know how great it can be, not only physically but also mentally. And for me, it was about, let's take this to where they are. Let's meet them where they're at. I know that most tradies are never going to step foot in a yoga studio. So how can we take it to them? How can we keep it light? How can we keep it fun and make sure that they get those benefits from it as well?
And it's met well?
It's been amazing. It is absolutely one of the most, most sought after of the services that we offer. It's something that everyone loves. And I think, just seeing a whole bunch of tradies in high vis and hard hats and boots doing a yoga is it's something that just grabs everyone's attention.
I think there's an element of that.
Yeah.
It's fun to be a part of.
Yeah.
I want to do a little bit of a, thought experiment. Are you able to imagine you rock up, obviously you wouldn't know them, but you rock up to a worksite and you're going to do the Healthy Tradie Project and Dale's there. How do you think he would have responded all the way back in 2009?
Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah.
Of
course.
I think he'd probably tell her, I'm still not doing that fucking shit. He probably would have been the one of those ones who's like,
yeah.
But I think he also would have been one of those leaders who would have probably brought everyone along for the ride.
Yeah.
Once he realised the benefits of it, and he would have had everyone in there doing the same thing.
The way you described him, they're some of the most. I've got 3 kids, and the trait of doing your own thing, regardless of the abrasiveness, I think it's something you got to protect. And as beautiful as it is when somebody says, I'm not doing that. Like I quite find that quite endearing because they're being themselves. But at the same time, it's that same person that when they see it, this works, all right, I'm going to do it. Oi, why won't you do it? You're too cool for us kind of thing. Like, it sounds like he would have played both sides of the fence, but no at the start, yes at the end, but bringing people along. Yeah. Now, nuts and bolts of Healthy Tradie Project. Someone's struggling at work. They're struggling in life and they're at work and you come in. How does it improve that person's, what's the pathway that they're going to follow to, I guess, one, improve, let's assume that they don't need crisis. How does it improve their position?
I think at an individual level,
Yeah.
what we're focusing on is how do we have that person showing up both at work and at home as their absolute best self. And for us, that we get there through what we're doing, I guess, the boundaries that we set for the things that are really important to us. So, for exercise, first and foremost. I know exercise has always been my go-to, and it's something that I need to keep me in a healthy space. So making sure that people are getting a level of movement and exercise that supports them physically and mentally. We look at nutrition, what they're eating, how that's affecting their mood, their focus, their attention, their energy levels. We talk about mindset. How are they dealing with the pressure and the stress of life? Not just at work, but at home. They've often got competing priorities, the financial pressures, all of those things, and what practices are they putting in place to help them better cope with those pressures? And that's where we use the mindfulness or breathwork or meditation to help support that. We look at sleep and how important that recovery is. I think we tend to put sleep last, and we focus on sleep once we've got everything else done that we think we need to get done for the day. Mm-hmm. And I really feel like we need to flip that narrative, and we need to make sleep a priority. And because it's when we're getting enough sleep that we're actually recovered and able to perform better the next day. And then sun and play are the two other things that we talk about. Play, that social connection, engaging with people, keeping it light, no routine, no structure, no outcome, just doing whatever it is because you enjoy that activity. And then, the importance of sun and vitamin D and how that impacts our immune system. It keeps us healthy. And it also, I think, supports our mood. So we've focused very much, I guess, to date on those elements and that individual well-being and how we support those people to actually come to work and be the best version of themselves at work, but then also and also then that impacts on how they, I guess, interact with the people around them and the people in their team. But then also allowing them to show up at home and be the best version of themselves, whether that's with, as a husband, a wife, a mum, a dad, and being that best version of themselves for their family.
Yeah, that individual, I want to get to the group aspect as well, but that individual level, something that else you mentioned in your TED Talk is that you rode from Canberra to Brisbane that way, 1,600 kilometres, and you were stopping at every Lifeline clinic?
The office, yeah.
Office on the way. And you said, it sticks with me because I can remember the eyes of somebody else that I spoke to at a talk early on with Afra, but somebody came up and they said to you, for words, I can't remember them clearly, but there's not help like this out there.
Is there really help out there?
Is there really help out there? I mean, that moves you because that's somebody in a helpless situation.
Yeah.
How have you seen the Healthy Tradie Project change people like that, where they've gone from not knowing what to do to just having a little bit and then hopefully?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that me sharing my story and sharing Dale's story, one of the biggest things that it does is I feel like it gives permission almost for other people to share their own. And this is something that I often find if I go into a workplace and I share that story, the amount of mostly men who come and speak to me afterwards and straight up say, I lost this person, or I lost that person, or I experienced this. And it's almost like it's giving them permission to be vulnerable. It's giving them permission to share and drop that facade, drop those walls, and just have that conversation. So, yeah, I feel like that's probably a big part of it. And then I feel like the other part of it is it just allows people to really sit and kind of look inside, and I probably look in and look at their own life and go, well, okay, what are the things that I need to change here? Of that whole wheel, what's just one thing that I can focus on and I can do differently to, I guess, help me be a better person.
And I think what you're doing is, I mean, it's incredible on an individual lens. Like you say, when you see people, their shoulders relax in real time and they come up and share with you what they've been through, it's so tangible, the amount of, even though it's just so little, the amount of cathartic release that gives them, because it speaks it into existence. They realise they're not crazy, for lack of a better term, or they're not alone. Mm. And what you're doing as well, I think it's a part of the world that where if you are able to get what you want done, it will permeate through society, because some of these people are the ones that a lot of people look to. They're the ones that when things get rough, the strong figureheads are around. It's like, what are they doing? I need to attach. And if they're the ones that are also saying, hey, make sure you get some sleep, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. I don't know, it just holds a bit more weight in some people's eyes.
Yeah, that ripple effect is huge, and I think that's what, then goes on to obviously have an effect on others and have an effect on a team and a workplace, and where you've got people that are coming in and and I say again, I come back to construction. It's an industry that relies on people, and we need to look after those people if we're going to be successful and we're going to have longevity. And I think for blue-collar workers particularly, to have longevity in their career, they need to look after themselves. They need to look after their body. If they get to a point in time in their life that, this doesn't work or that hurts or this hurts, it's then has an impact on their ability to earn an income. And that can then have obviously a greater impact on their mental health as well. And, if they're a provider for their family. And I think these are the sorts of stories that I hear from different people. And, sometimes you get those, the 18, 19, 20-year-old who are, straight up in the industry, who are invincible, nothing's ever happened to them.
Yep.
You then might get the 30-something-year-old who has her family, who has a mortgage and, may have gone through an injury at some point in time and understands the importance of keeping themselves healthy. And you get a real mix in the older generation. You get those that are, never done that, never going to even try it. They're the old school. But then I've also had, I never forget it, a gentleman who was at a precast concrete factory, and he was probably in his late 50s. He'd been out of work for a period of time, and they gave him an opportunity. And he said to me after the session, he said, and he told me his story, and he'd come back to work, and he said, you've just made me realise how important it is for me to be able to look after my body. And he said, can you print all those poses so I can put them up on the factory wall so that I don't forget them? But, for him it was about, how do I stay in the best shape I can to be able to continue doing what I love for as long as I can. So it's a mix. It's a real mix within, I guess, the demographic that we work with, but I think it's starting to change, and I think people are starting to realise that, it's important to look after not only yourself, but then I guess those around you and the environment we create at work.
It is a bit of a narrative twist, isn't it? It's like trying to help people see the reason that they're doing it, and it might not be as immediate as the alternative, but it's in terms of, if you want to look after these people, if you want to look after your ability to do this, you need to play a bit of a longer game and a bit of a smarter game. And I think some people I know Benny, the way he's talking about nervous system health, that seems to be resonating quite well with people, just like a lens, and it seems to be very similar to what the wheel that you're talking about, just putting it in practical terms. And I think that's really important because it can be, and I mean this because I am as airy-fairy as they come. It can, like, mental health can be as, like, existential and it can all be there for you to, like, question and ponder and think, but sometimes it's just really good to go, let's just focus on, like, the practical stuff for the moment, and then we'll get to the other stuff.
Yeah.
Healthy Tradie Project, 0 blue-collar suicides.
Yeah,
That's
the
the mission.
goal.
What does that look like? How do you get there?
I think from the industry, there's a lot that needs to shift in terms of culture and in terms of focus on wellbeing. I think as an industry, we do a great job at focusing on safety and the physical, I guess, aspects of safety. What I want to do is shine a spotlight on health and wellbeing. It's WHS for a reason, but I think we forget the H in between. So I think for me, it's about how we really shine a spotlight on wellbeing and then the flow-on effect that has to safety on site. And when we have people that are actually, in a better place from a health and wellbeing perspective, it supports our industry in not only having a safer industry, but having, retaining people in the industry, and just overall building a workplace or an environment or an industry that people feel happy and comfortable to come and work in. But it's a big shift. It's a big, I think as an industry, it's very much, if you're not working, you're not being productive. If I can't see you out there on the tools, then you're not being productive. And, the 6 or 7 day a week, working conditions, it's got to be in the past. We've got to start providing people time for life. We've got to start giving people the opportunity to really focus on health and wellbeing so that we do have a healthier and happier workforce.
Got to let the concrete set.
Yeah, that's a good one.
How can people help drive that? Like help the Healthy Tradie Project, or maybe help in their everyday lives with the same mission as the Healthy Tradie Project?
Yeah, I think certainly for business owners out there, I think it's recognising that, people are your most important asset, and ensuring that they are, I guess, valued, their time's valued. You're supporting them from a wellbeing perspective. I think as individuals, I think sometimes, the masses can speak the loudest. So I think as individuals, then, having a voice and allowing that to be heard about what you need, speaking up and letting employers, letting workplaces know what it is that you need. And I think at an individual level, it is just having the conversations, being open to talk about mental health. No different to physical health, because that's, the two go hand in hand and the two blend, and we can't have one without the other, and we just need to normalise those conversations.
I agree with you. Pip, before we wrap up, and I don't, it just came to me, but I think it's the right question to finish with, because I think if somebody's still listening to this, it means that your stories resonated with them for whatever reason. But if you could go back to 2009, what do you think you'd want to tell Dale?
I love him. And I only wish he'd let me in. But he made the choice that he did. And I'll always love him. And I'll ensure that his legacy always lives on.
You're a special person, Pip, and you're doing special work. And I've no doubt that you've already helped people like Dale. And I hope you can be proud of yourself. And I know I don't know him, but I know based on what you've told me and what I can see that there's no other way he couldn't be proud of you. So
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.